In this next episode of the Waboripedia Traditional Japanese Community Member Spotlight, we'll be sitting down with Aaron. Aaron has an incredible East meets West bodysuit. He's been a longtime supporter of all things Horimono and is one of the moderators of the popular Irezumi subreddit. Join me as we sit down with Aaron and learn more about this incredible collector. Aaron Lisaragi, good morning. Thank you so much for joining.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
It's great because, I've known you for a relatively, I don't know if long time's the right word for it, but, I know that you're a very big supporter of all things Horimono, Wabori, Irezumi. You're one of the moderators for the Irezumi subreddit. It's arguably one of the biggest subreddits around Japanese tattooing. And a fun tidbit I'll throw out before we get started is that I think you might own every single book out there around Horimono.
Yeah, I don't know what I own and what I don't anymore. I haven't kept a good glossary of the books, but sometimes I have 3 and 4 copies of the same one when I see a deal like that.
That's hilarious. Yeah, a new book is coming out, and I don't even ask because I know that Aaron's probably gonna get it. So
Yep.
that's how it is. But anyway, I thought it would be great to have Aaron in here. Aaron brings obviously great backing into the world of Horimono, but then also I think he'll bring some very interesting perspectives. He's got a pretty cool bodysuit of East meets West. We're going to be taking a look at some of the pictures of his tattoos a little bit later. But having prefaced all that, let's just start with the main question, Aaron. How did you discover and decide to get Horimono?
I started getting tattoos before I understood what Horimono was and meant. So I was introduced to the idea of Japanese tattooing at an earlier age. I took an Eastern philosophy class in high school. The gentleman by the name of Dr. Thomas Scott in my high school class taught Asian history and then Asian and Eastern philosophy. And so I took both of those classes and was introduced there first to the ukiyo-e woodblock prints and fell in love with that art style. Simultaneously, as part of the Asian history class, we studied, obviously, the history of feudal Japan all the way up into the industrial and modern age, and we had a brief period of study with the Yakuza and some of the crime information, and so I never connected the idea that the tattoos that were spoken of were Horimono, the Wabori, and that idea was unconnected until I discovered Sandy Fellman's book, actually. So I've actually got the copy on my desk over here. I found it in a Dade County library at a library closeout sale 20-something years ago, bought a copy and just said, this is what tattoos can look like. I still had no idea what Irezumi, what Horimono, what any of those terms meant, but I fell in love with the art because it finally merged the ukiyo-e to the tattooing for me.
That's awesome. It's pretty cool. And so, obviously, you started by saying, that you sort of started getting tattooed before you even knew about what Horimono really was, right? And obviously, as we'll see, you do have a lot of work. In talking to you privately, you seem to have a lot of stories and have a lot of work by a lot of people. So that's pretty cool. And then I guess I'll sort of follow up with this one. I think I opened up the conversation saying that you're one of the moderators for the Irezumi subreddit. I also said that it's one of the biggest subreddits or maybe the biggest on Horimono. I'm not even joking. You can go in there, Irezumi, and you're gonna see that it's like top 1 or something like that. It's pretty crazy. But this is all to say, what are your thoughts on the power of community and knowledge sharing?
Well, I think the knowledge needs to be compartmentalized and shared. By that specifically, the history is very important. That should be foundational. The difference between the Irezumi group that we have on Reddit and just somebody walking down the street with a sleeve that may be Japanese inspired is very different thing. You and I, we live and breathe this Horimono. We love it. I know you collect as many books as I do. And we've really been intrigued not only by the history, not only by the aesthetic of the tattoo, but we just love the mythology behind the stories that the tattoos tell. We love the history of the art form. We love the history of how the art was practiced. And I think in the US, it's still very difficult to come by a concise historical account of where tattooing was in Japan and exactly when it was introduced to the US. There's arguments all the time about brought it in. Was it Pinky Yoon? Was it, was it Sailor Jerry and his combinations? And of all these different branches that spread out across the United States, gathering it back together so we understand it is a very important thing.
Yep. Yeah, nicely said, for sure. And then, there's a lot of misinformation out there. In fact, it's a pretty casual conversation, so I'll throw this out there. In doing my research for the Waboripedia book, right? I looked all over for information in English and Japanese and Chinese. I even had Korean friends helping me out with Korean. And sometimes I would see artworks at either art galleries or museums, right? Mm-hmm. And they would describe what the artwork is, and then they would give a little snippet of the story behind it. But then if you read the text in the actual artwork, it would be totally different. And I was like, what is this, right? It's like they just made it up, right?
Yeah, one of the most mislabeled that I see all the time is Jiraiya on the Toad. There are some very famous prints where, oh, this is Jiraiya. Well, if you look at the inscriptions and you can read it, it's not.
Yeah,
people do the research there. It's pretty interesting, but it's it's fun to uncover those things, though. In my opinion, it's interesting.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then also, there are books out there, but unfortunately, it seems that most good Japanese books are written in Japanese. First of all, written in Japanese. Second, they're like limited run prints, so very, very few copies out there. And then third, if you do find them online, they're like super messed up, like used, and they're like these insane markups, right? Something that you look at the price at the tag, the MSRP is maybe like $15, and it's being sold for like $700. Although I'll say, somebody like you or me probably are gonna buy it anyway. But
yes, yeah, people have definitely made money off of me by just impulsively buying something that I want and desire. But there are secrets, and if you're connected to the community, you can come by copies. I think it was somebody just last week was saying, hey, I accidentally bought 2 copies of the Horikyo book. Well, he's going to share that with somebody and give him a good deal. I would keep 2, and I'd have one at the office and one at the house, but that's me being selfish, not sharing the insult. So
that's cool. Yeah, and then I guess before we move on, for sure, I think answering my own question, obviously the power of community, not just for preserving the history and the culture of Japanese tattooing, which obviously is good for Japanese tattooers themselves in Japan. It'll preserve the culture, the history. It'll give them some of the spotlight, but then also for people interested in either, tattooers doing the work or people wanting to get the work. It's obviously very important that you know what you're doing, right? You don't want to be walking around with something that's totally off base, right? I think, something related is when people get the Chinese characters, either kanji or actual Chinese, like Mandarin Chinese, and they think it'll say something very cool, but then it's something like I love tofu or something ridiculous, right? They don't even know it.
Yes.
So,
I always believe those are truly intentional. Somebody walks in and says, I want this, and they mockingly put something else on their body. But again, I think the specialness of the Wabori is that because it is such a pictographic art, you don't have much written characters in it. You might have the banji or particular signs that artists make, but it's very, very visible, and the stories need to be researched on their own. If you look at a tattoo really well done, you can appreciate it aesthetically, but until you actually dig into the mythology behind it, you don't know what it means. And that's
Yeah.
something very special that I don't think any other art and tattooing has.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. You know, knowing, having that knowledge connects you obviously to history, to the many hundred years of history of those particular stories, but it also gives meaning to what you're getting, right? I think one of the things that many Orishi say is how, or maybe even clients, right? They get something because they want to get the powers of whatever they're getting, or maybe they relate to the story of what they're getting, right? So obviously, before you make that connection, you need to know, well, the background of what you're getting, right? So,
Right.
100%. Cool. All right. Well, let's do this. I'm going to start, because we could keep talking about this one point for forever. I'm going to start sharing my screen, because I open it up by saying that we're going to take a look at some of your works.
Okay, it's there. Yep. This is my back piece with some of the other work on the legs starting to get taken. These photos are about 6 months old, I would say. So there is some additional work there now where I've tied in the left knee is complete on the back side. But yeah, this is a good depiction of the work that I've had done in the collecting. I've collected for over 20 years now, so I'm not sure exactly how long, but the crucifixion scene on the left shoulder blade was actually my first tattoo, and everything was collected in varying degrees over the next 20 years. So I got that when I was 18 from a professional tattoo shop here in just south of Minneapolis, and it really started me down the journey of collecting a full bodysuit.
Nice. Yeah. And we see a lot of interesting stuff. You know, there's so much that I don't even know where to start. But I'll start by the one that really catches your eye, and that's the peonies. Like I love these peonies. Like I could see you from a mile away, and I could look at those peonies and think, wow, those are pretty fantastic, right? And then the way that everything's been tied together is obviously very good. Again, you mentioned the crucifixion scene. It really ties well. You know, the artist did a very good job with the background, right? It's like natural. It looks perfect, right? And then it's on a stone, which makes sense, right? So that's pretty cool. Yeah, there's so much stuff I could talk about. Obviously, I'm going to reserve some of the comments because we'll look at some other angles of the work. But I really wanted to call out how everything's been tied very nicely together, and I think it's a very good representation of, again, East meets West.
Now, with what you're seeing here, one of the most common questions we see on Irezumi is, if I already have American traditional work, can I start collecting? Can I do something and have a cohesive bodysuit? And the answer is going to vary from person to person, but you can see here that the artist that did the Makiri and the peonies is Sean Anderson out of Dragonland Tattoo. Tattooers know him. He tattoos a lot of tattooers. He's been in the business for a very long time. But one of the distinct things that I very much appreciated about the experience, he looked at the woman on my back and he said, "Does she have a name?" He wanted to be very respectful, and he cared about the traditions, even though he's an American tattooer, of making sure that everything went together and he could tie it in as seamlessly as possible. And he was extremely respectful of the crucifixion tattoo. And again, his goal was to not overpower, but make everything look like it was one and intentionally one. And I think he did a great job. And again, the peonies are everybody's favorite. Those are my favorite as well.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. And, you know, I'm looking, the more I look at it, the more you can find very cool, small details in here. I'm about to put you on the spot, Aaron. So if you can't answer, then that's totally fine. But obviously I see the clouds in there. I see stone, but then I also see water and I see movement in there. I don't know, was there a particular order that happened, or because it looks good?
So the order of the tattoos collected on the back were the crucifixion scene, and we'll just call her a geisha. She's an unnamed geisha compiled from several Kuniyoshi prints that I actually liked. So it's a combination from several things. And then it took me years to find somebody willing to do my back. And I talked to at least half a dozen, if not a dozen artists. No one wanted to touch it because of the work that I already had done. They didn't feel capable of tying things together. And when I went with Sean, he was excited about the process. So we sat down, had the consult, he took photos and drew everything up, and everything was very intentional. And again, the movement, as we move to other photos, the movement is very special, especially in the lower half of the body. It's really well done with the water.
Awesome. Yeah. Before I move on to the next picture, I'll just keep mentioning the background, right? Because one element that many people perhaps don't know, don't understand, right, is how, you should follow the natural order of things, right? The clouds should be at the top.
Yes.
The water should be either at the middle or at the bottom, and the same for the stones, right? Unless you're doing like a waterfall scene or something where it naturally makes sense, then it doesn't make sense for the clouds to be at the bottom and the water to be at the top, right? But what we can see here is that obviously the tattooer followed those rules. I don't know if Aaron, if you had a say in that, or if he did his own research and figured it out. But
this was all him, and again, he's an extremely professional individual. Everything that he ever has done has been immaculate, and again, he's someone that loves his craft and is just as passionate about this art form as we are. So it's very special to be able to work with him.
Awesome. It's pretty awesome. All right, let's move along here to this angle, and I'm going to let you speak about it.
Okay. So what you are looking at is a depiction of Kintaro wrestling a carp. This was my first attempt at having anything that was related to Japanese tattooing. It was done by Travis Browning Smith in Madison, Wisconsin, a great tattooer, specializes in Art Nouveau, so very different than what we did here, at least 2 decades ago now, probably. But right around this time is when I discovered the Sandy Fellman book, and I just loved the depictions, but I was still collecting as a Westerner would. One-shot piece. This one obviously was not a one-shot. It was several sessions with all the scales and the size of it. But again, I still had the mentality of, I'm just going to collect a piece of the puzzle and put it down on my leg, and then we'll go somewhere else and put the next piece in. So I still didn't have the sense of what bodysuits could look like, and if that was the pursuit I was going. Peeking on the top of the thigh, you can see a section of a Namakubi with the severed head, and that's done by Rhino in Chicago. He's a phenomenal tattooer, part of many of the Wabori communities. The funny story about that one is I had some business in Chicago and wanted to get tattooed by Rhino, so I told my wife 2 weeks ahead, hey, I'm going to go to Chicago. I have to sign some papers and things. And I didn't tell her what day. I forgot to tell her what day. So I got up early, went to work, flew out, and then my flight was delayed. So I came home with a severed head, which was her least favorite tattoo at the time. And I was about 5 hours late for dinner without telling her. So it was not one of my proudest moments. But I do pursue the art to an extent above and beyond just the normal collector going to the local shop. Again, I seek out Rhino because of his talent, and that's one of my favorite tattoos. It's the elegance in the hair, and again, the balance of the violence and kind of stillness in a Namakubi has always been very interesting to me. We have a sake bottle with shoujo on it. For anyone who doesn't know the stories about the shoujo, it's a very fun tale in Japan. They're I don't know if you would consider them oni, but they're some kind of a small demon or gremlin, and they love drinking sake. And there are several myths related to them. It's a fun story to dig into, especially if you enjoy sake like I do. And so we did this one actually with the Irezumi. We used to do the live questions with artists, so we were answering questions from an artist as I was getting tattooed at the Minneapolis Tattoo Convention. So this is done by Tim Bradley at Slave at the Needle Tattoo, and he's a phenomenal tattooer that combines that East meets West very well in his stylings. He loves the Wabori, but he adds his own Western flair to it in a very interesting and unique way. And then below that, we have some work that is actually being hand-carved tawori by Johnny Higgins in Minneapolis. And we have the Hekigani crab. I think on the other side of the knee, there's another one, but very, very fun piece. And he's lining everything with a machine and then shading with the sumi and tawori carving by hand. So a very fun experience. And again, I recommend anyone who is collecting Western artwork, if you have the opportunity, get tattooed by hand. It's very interesting experience and very unique. Most people collecting that way don't get to experience the Western shop experience, and most people collecting the Western way don't get to experience the traditional by hand method.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so a lot of cool stuff in here. I'll pick on some of the bits that you mentioned, but just starting, you see a good mix of styles, right? More traditional looking stuff, more neo traditional elements as well, which is pretty cool to see that mix, right? We talked about East meets West mix, but then we also see a traditional and neo trad mix as well, which is pretty cool. You also mentioned, I like how you're dropping names here, a lot of different artists that you've worked with. Some of them have actually also they're following Waboripedia, and I've talked to them, and pretty amazing people. They're always seeking to learn more, which is obviously a great thing in general, but particularly as a tattoo artist, right? You should strive to learn more, right? Obviously that Namakubi, like you mentioned, looks fantastic. I've also been following his work. I see it just get better and better every day.
He's getting very, very good. He's going to be a master.
So that's amazing. And then also you see the Heikigani there at the bottom. These are awesome because for those people who don't know, so the Heikigani are an actual crab, and they actually do have that face in the back, right? So they really do look this weird or this interesting. And the little story that I'll just throw out here randomly out of the blue on this one is that they take their name from the Heike warriors, like the Taira clan. There was this scene, the Battle of Dan no Ura, where the Taira clan sort of fell, right? And, they fell at the sea. And the myth goes that those fallen warriors transformed into these Heike crab or Heikigani, right? And so that's the whole mythology behind them. And again, they're real. So you can actually Google them or search them, and they look pretty cool. I also like how it looks traditional, right? It looks great. And then you also mentioned Tewori, right? So I like how it's like fully traditional, right? It's a traditional figure, and you're doing it the traditional way. And then I guess the last thing I'll add before we move on to the next picture is your comment around the like machine versus Tewori approach, right? And something that many people might not know is, Tewori takes a very long time. It's by hand. You basically have this stick with needles at one end, and the artist is just stabbing away to do the work. It takes a long time. I personally feel that it's not as painful as machine. So it's sort of like a relaxation, meditation experience for me when I'm getting the body work done, but it does take more time. It also has these mythical properties that many Morishi joke about. I know that Alex Empty I think he called it that. I'm paraphrasing here, but he said like the mythical properties. I was like, yeah, mythical properties. Some people say that it ages differently, right? The way that the ink evolves is different from the way that the machining sort of diffuses and ages, right? And, again, mythical properties because it's sort of true. Is it a factor of the fact that, most of body work is sort of hidden from the sunlight for the most part, and maybe it's that, or is the sumi ink to a major factor in how the ink ages, or is it really the application, the body? Is it all the above? Nobody knows, but it's certainly an experience in getting it, and then afterward, as the work ages and evolves.
And I can tell those for people that are disbelieving, I was in the camp that I said, oh, it doesn't matter. And until you start seeing it live and start experiencing it for yourself, the difference is incredible, but you have to see it to believe it. There's nothing I can do to convince you, but when you start looking at them regularly, and more than just on the computer or in a book, when you see them in person, it's incredible. I had the opportunity to see some Horiken work, and I was immediately converted to a believer. When you see it in person, you're like, okay, yes, this is different, and it's something special.
For sure, 100%. It has this depth, this power to it, which is, again, like Aaron said, you really do have to see it to sort of believe it, right? Awesome. All right, let's actually move along to the next one. All right, Aaron.
So this one was done by Jeb Mehud. Well, he was guest spotting up here. He's another member of the Irezumi community on Reddit. I'd followed him before that. You know, he's a journeyman tattooer that's been all over the country, all over the world. But the very special piece of a combination here, and again, collected in the Western way because I have a lot of stuff on my leg, and I wanted to fill in that spot. So I said, here's the spot. Do what you need to do. And the results speak for itself. I think it came out awesome. So lots of different elements in there that you can call out, but very, very powerful piece in a small area, just the top of the kneecap.
Yeah. I love this one because it's very funny. It's very clever. It's so there's like two elements in here, or maybe even three combined. You have the Kasa Obake, which is the umbrella demon, so to speak. And that's one type of yokai, but then you also have the Hyotoku in there. So that's the man there with the funny mouth gesture. And it's pretty funny and pretty clever how he mixed both of them. It looks fantastic. I really love this piece, even though it's obviously relatively small, but I think it's relatively also powerful and interesting. So it's very cool to see this. And I guess today I'm throwing random tidbits of information, and the one that I'll throw here is that this concept of, let's say, for example, an umbrella getting life and being alive or being a demon, it's called tsukumogami in Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this idea that after 100 years, an item or whatever, anything, it'll sort of come to life and it'll be alive, right? And so you have everyday objects, umbrellas, folding screens, all sorts of stuff in traditional Japanese mythology or folklore that suddenly have a mind and life of their own. And then obviously just tying it back to this piece, the umbrella is one of those elements, right? And then, again, the Hyotoku also very, very cool to see it here. Also very traditional figure in Japanese throughout the different Japanese art forms. I think nowadays it's usually seen in a sort of gesture-like way in Japanese theater and plays and so on and so forth. But yeah, overall, again, just really love it. I also do love how he did the clouds there in the umbrella. It's pretty cool. So that's the third element that I was sort of hinting at. So yeah, this is very, very well done. Very small area, like you said, and then just the execution looks
the level
fantastic.
Of detail put in there in such a small piece. Again, very special, very, very neat experience to have to work with him.
Awesome. All right. Yeah, Aaron has a lot of work. We could be here for hours on end talking about all the stuff he has and all the stuff that he's working at. But I selfishly decided to cap it at these three pictures so that we can move along and continue the conversations. This was the last piece that we're actually talking about, but I'm sure we might even have Aaron in the future once he finishes the Heikegani. I'm sure I'm going to have a lot of questions. The community's going to have a lot of questions about the process and how it turns out and all that good stuff. But reeling the conversation back to the pre-scripted questions that I always love to share with people. In terms of like favorite stuff, do you have like a favorite subject or design or theme?
I am such a fan of the stories and the mythology. We were talking about the differences in translations and finding information. Urashima Taro is such an interesting story to me because there are so many relevant myths in different cultures that are similar. You know, you have the element of a man rescuing an animal, and that could be seen as like the lion with the thorn in its paw. And then he goes underwater and he lives 100 years or whatever the time passes, and there's different elements. And again, I think the very special thing about the stories is, as Westerners, we don't get the whole story, right? There's such a cultural aspect in digging into them, and it's almost a mystery of sorts to understand everything that goes into it. So that's one that I've read many times, and there's many depictions, and I still don't understand it all.
That's funny. But by the way, I also wanted to call out that you can see how Aaron knows a lot about the stories. I didn't expect him to bring up Urashima Taro. I don't think many people in the West know about that. Maybe even in Japan, they might not even know that much about that particular story. But then I guess following on that thread, do you have like a favorite story or tradition in either Japanese tattooing or folklore or whatever?
Urashima Taro is one of my favorites. I really enjoy the Peach Boy. Momotaro is just a phenomenal story. You know, the story about Kintaro as well in the mountains and growing up as kind of a ruddy, wild boy. I associate that. I have a son now, so that, you know, I'd like him to turn out more like Momotaro and take care of mom and dad and things like that. But the rowdiness and spirit is probably more in line with the rowdy nature of Kintaro. But really, I love absorbing it all. And more than just the Japanese culture, I've always been fascinated with the mythology in general. But because Japan has so many influences about its culture, it's really made it special. So you have the Ainu in the south, with their own stories. You have some of the influence from China and in there with obviously the water margin and the golden. But everything is very special, and it all has a very important place in my heart.
That's awesome. Yeah, I like how you threw your kid in there and associated him with the stories. That's funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know what? Kintaro actually also turned out to be an actual folklore
very famous
hero.
warrior. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's in the right path either way. So that's good.
Yes. Yeah. Hopefully, I'm not the mountain witch raising him, but. But yes, that's a very cool story for anybody. They should look into it. It's fun to read.
Awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. And then what about, you know, obviously you have a lot of stuff in your body, a lot of different tattoos, and now you're getting the body experience, and you know, all these stories. You have all these books, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But then you have also all this knowledge about the folklore and the traditions and so on and so forth. So I'm wondering, maybe the answer to this is no, in no way, and that's totally fine. But how would you say your tattoos or the journey have sort of impacted you?
You know, I encourage anyone pursuing tattooing to collect it as an experience rather than a finished piece of artwork. There's a very different thing about people collecting a bodysuit than someone handing money across a table and going to the tattoo shop once in their life. And neither is more important or more valid. Tattoo artists obviously want both. But the uniting thing within this community is you and I know how it feels to sit for hours. And even if you're doing tabori or machine, there's a discomfort with just being in the same posture. There's a discomfort with having to be disrobed to a certain level. There's a discomfort with healing and experiencing the tattoo that others they aren't part of that community. They won't understand that. And that's a very uniting thing. There's so many people that are willing to sit and talk to you and I about their tattoo experiences and things because we're part of that brotherhood, for lack of a better term. And so that's the thing. I mean, I always joke about tattoos being time machines. I can remember when I was getting my knee, what songs were playing, who was sitting in the tables next to me. And again, that's something special to the Western tattooing. I'm not in a private studio. There may be 12 booths, and you hear the hum of the machine as opposed to, a Japanese baseball game on the radio or something if you're doing a traditional studio in Japan. But it's a very unique thing, and cataloging those experiences and sharing those experiences is just as important as that finished piece of skin that you can display.
That's very very well said. The whole traditional Japanese tattooing experience, again, whether it's by devotee or by machine, you're collecting, whether it's a hikai, like the chest plates on the arms, or you're just doing the back, or you're doing the whole bodysuit. It takes a long time. It's not a one-point tattoo. It takes a lot of commitment, takes a lot of discipline, takes a lot of pain, takes a lot of money, takes a lot of many things, right? And so it really does, it's like a trial by, fire, it's not fire, but a trial by pain that many of us go through, and then we can relate to each other, right? And then again, just so many similarities and experiences, and it's sort of a, I don't know, subculture sounds sort of negative nowadays, but it is like a subculture, and everybody, we're interested in the stories, we're interested in the figures, we have shared knowledge, we have shared, again, interests and all that. So it really does impact you, maybe not in an extremely dramatic way. Well, I'm sure some people have some extreme outcomes, but it does sort of impact you in these subtle ways, and instilling discipline and tolerance. In Japanese, there's this term gaman, right? To persevere, to take the pain or take whatever comes at you. And so I think everybody who's pursuing traditional Japanese tattoos do follow or have that spirit, or they experience or they looking for words here. They gaman, they take it, they withstand.
Yeah, there's a mind-body component here that a non-tattooed person doesn't understand. And there's many people that have said it more eloquently than I can. But again, there's a discipline physically, emotionally, spiritually that you need to pursue this.
That's awesome. All right, and sort of trailing back to a comment I made earlier, I wasn't joking when I said that you have a museum or maybe 2 museums worth of books.
Yep.
So my question for you is, what are some of your favorite books? And the second part of the question is, since you have so many books and you've read so many books, what are you looking for nowadays?
So one of the things that I really enjoy about our community has been the willingness to share the book reviews on the Irezumi. I have so many books that I'm running out of space. And so I much appreciate when someone's willing to share, this is what the book has in it. And then I can decide if it's one that I need to add to my collection or not. And more often than not, I do. But there are some very special ones. I already mentioned the Japanese Tattoo by Sandy Feldman. Everyone should have that in their collection. It's an important pictographic representation of 3 different artists. And it was the first one that, to me, did a very good brief overview of what the artist's work was, why they put it in the skin, but also gave us very good photo representation of what these tattoos could look like in color. The Japanese Tattoo by Moriarty is another very important one. I'm just peeking upward because I keep a set of books of what I think is important in my office as well as at my house. So that should tell you the copies that I have double of. I'm a very, very big fan of Mike Dorsey's work, his willingness to transform some of the classical tradition into his own interpretations. So Japan Reimagined is one that is up there. I'm, again, very interested in the stories and some of the darker stories in the mythology. So I have Something Wicked This Way Comes, Nightmare Creatures. Jack Dorsey, I believe, does a bunch of different ukiyo-e prints and collections. Those are phenomenal to get for someone at an entry level. Tattoos is Punishment by Eric Shahan. I really enjoy some of the stuff that he's put together for our community. And then the one that I actually have on my desk here, I'm not sure if I can see this. This is The Japanese Tattoo by Don Ritchie and Ian Burma.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if it's the first Western representation of some of the Japanese tattooing. It's the experience that they saw when they were traveling in Japan, and they did some history. And there are some things written in there that you still don't see. You know, we often think of the tattooing in Japan as that wabori, but there are aspects of the Ainu people that were doing it for cultural reasons. There were relational reasons people were getting tattooed, whether or not they were, a mistress might get a special tattoo with their lover and things of that nature that haven't been recorded everywhere. And that history and foundation is all framework for how this wabori evolved. And so again, that's a very interesting one. I like to read that one at least once a year.
Awesome. Yeah, those are very good call outs. I do, as you suspected, I do have them as well. I have read them as well.
Nope.
They're very good because they provide different points of value, right? Some are the historical component of it, some are the artistic representation components of it, others are sort of evolving the art, right, and bringing those traditional components and giving their own flair to them, right? So yeah, those are very good call outs. Like Aaron said in the Irezumi, Aaron has been doing a lot of book reviews, which are great, right? Like we both mentioned earlier, many of the good books are unfortunately limited runs. They're very expensive and so on and so forth. So these reviews are very good I think we're all limited on cash stuff to some extent, right? Yes. So they're very good to know, okay, maybe I should put my hard-earned cash to this one, or maybe not to this one, right? So it's very cool to see that you guys, well, I've also actually participated a little bit in that, but that's happening. I do encourage whoever is watching or listening to read them, and if they have some books and some thoughts to share their books and thoughts as well, because it's very helpful for the community, right? That's how we grow. Right. That's how we keep things alive, and that's how we keep exactly that community.
Yeah, and awesome. I will make a call out. I haven't been as excited about an upcoming book as I have been in a while, so I'm very excited to finally get my hands on the Waboripedia. I know several of us are very giddy about it and excited, so thank you for putting that together.
That's awesome. I really appreciate that. You're obviously a strong supporter of all things Sori Mono and Wabori. That's what I started with. Again, because Aaron has just so much knowledge and passion for this stuff. The Waboripedia book sort of like throwing a little bit about it out there. Obviously, it's a compilation of the stories behind the different figures. It talks about the pairings, what pairs with what, right? What backgrounds go with what. There's some history in there. There's some stuff about the different bodysuits. There's some suggested reading, which I think is actually trails nicely with what we just talked about, right? The reviews and what's useful, right? So I also did include like suggested reading and like, yeah, I'm suggesting this book, but here's why you should read this book, right? So that's also in there. There's about 100 figures plus that are covered. I've been throwing some previews on the Waboripedia Instagram, and a lot of excitement and stuff. I'm really appreciative of everybody who supported the book and is looking to get it. So
yeah, and the special things about the previews for anyone watching this is I think it does a very nice combination of giving you information in brevity. So it's a good one for those running a tattoo shop that want to introduce the art form and the options available without overwhelming somebody. And it's a very nice way to whet the appetite for people to dive deeper and start their journey.
Exactly. Oh, that's very, very nicely said. That's exactly it. It's not, the stories are not they're not super short, but they're not super long either. I think they hit that just right level of information, right? It covers what it needs to cover, and if you're super interested, then there's a whole world out there for you to explore, right, and read more. So for sure, I'm really excited. Also coming out in next month in November, we're going to start fulfilling orders and shipping them. So very excited about that. Also, I guess I'll throw out that the size of the book is also, I took that into consideration. Some of these books, very good books that are out there, are huge.
Yes.
And so they're nice to look at when you're at peace and you have space and such. But if you're traveling, you're flying, you're, I don't know, in a train or whatever, you're sleeping and you want to read it as you're sleeping, then you can't do that with those books. They're just so huge and heavy.
Yeah.
So the size that we chose for the book is really nice in terms of portability and being able to to read it anywhere you want. It's not small, so you don't have to like really kill your eyes trying to read it, but it's also not huge so that it's just inconvenient to carry around. So awesome. So I guess I'll end by asking, well, maybe two things, but one is, what more content or coverage would you like to see of Waboripedia? Because right now, obviously, Waboripedia started talking about, again, the stories and pairings about the figures, and sort of evolved into interviewing traditional Japanese tattooers, horishi from all around the world, and the figure behind the ink series. I also started recently just covering more topics about the tradition itself, right? There was one video around different stuff, the Taisho versus the Showa style. There's some other videos coming up, but all of this is not just me selfishly selecting what to talk about. I want to provide value to the world, right? So I'm very curious about, obviously I'm talking to Aaron, so I want to ask Aaron right now what else he wants to see in the future, but I also open the question up to everybody who's listening or watching. Please do provide input.
Well, again, I very much appreciate the access you give us to, as Westerners, to some of the artists over in Japan. The language barriers and just the contactability are prohibitive. So you're making a very important bridge between the two worlds, which is foundational. I think you've done a really good job with the ukiyo-e background, with the historical things. Foundationally as well, it'd be nice to start seeing some of the other art forms that do supply the themes for the Irezumi. So, some of the floral studies, there's a whole discipline of floral studies, floral arranging in Japan that influence it. And you don't necessarily need to go deep into it, but calling those things out that, hey, if you're interested in the flowers more than just the aesthetic of them, study this. And it's a very interesting thing, because people don't realize how big that iceberg is until they start diving under the waters. And this is a very, very comprehensive art form, and to become masterfully knowledge-based in it is almost impossible, right? You're never going to be the expert on all the components, but calling them out, it'd be interesting.
Well, yeah, that's a good suggestion, sort of like the direct and indirect influences in the art format. I think that's super important. You know what? You're full of analogies. I love it. You're full of the iceberg. That's really it. It is an iceberg. It's that picture that we see a lot nowadays of the tip of the iceberg, and then there's this huge thing under it. That really is Horimono and Wabori. So that's a very good analogy. Cool. Yeah, for sure. I'm going to take that into consideration. You mentioned the flowers, so obviously I'll start thinking about that one coming up soon, but then I'll also think about other direct and indirect influences to the art or to the craft, right?
Yeah, I don't know. Have you ever made a call out to any of the sumi manufacturers? I don't know if there's accessibility there. That would be a cool one as well, to see some of the tools.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'll have to think from a optics perspective, right? Not picking certain people over others, because then that unloads a storm of certain things. But I think it's also a good call, and now you make me think, like, the London Slate interview, he talked a lot about the different sumi inks, which I thought was fantastic. And so maybe a video and a post about the different sumi inks. Hey, there's some that have blue hues, some that have brown hues. Here's how you use them, how you and so on and so forth. I think that actually, that would be an awesome one. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think with all the legislation behind ink and things going on, it would be important for us as collectors to get more knowledge so we can support our artists better, so their tools aren't taken from them unnecessarily. It's that would be a good avenue.
Yeah. It's a very good idea. Awesome. Well, Aaron, that's all I have for you. I know we're both sort of short in time today, but I'll open it up to you. Anything you want to call out, anything you want to discuss. I still do have time, so I don't want to rush you or press you.
No, the only the only thing we had talked about offline too is again the tattoo experiences as you're collecting, they're very different from person to person, and um, there's not one better experience over another. I know you've had Jordan on here where he's collecting a bodysuit from one family and one artist, and that's a wonderful experience. So me, when I started compiling a list, I actually lost track of. I have over 20 artists. I think it's closer to 28 than it is. It's closer to 30 than it is 20. And so I obviously have very different experiences, and just people being willing to share that stuff and still feeling like they're part of the community is a very special thing about what you're doing and bringing together here. So I appreciate you having me on. And again, more the work that you're putting into this has been really a breath of fresh air, because I love reading the interviews. I love, especially the podcasts here. This is what I do on Fridays. I listen to these. So very special.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. No, before we call it, I do want to comment on what you just brought up, which is actually a very, very good point, right? In many aspects, right? Some people get one artist, one family. We mentioned Jordan, who we've had here. He has worked by the Horitoshi family. He's had the majority of bodysuit is Horisakura, right? Mm-hmm. But even tattoo artists, even Horishi, like extremely traditional Horishi from Japan. Many of them actually have a mishmash in sort of the traditional Western patchwork style, right? They have different one points and stuff like that, and then sometimes they sort of mix the bodysuit and build it around that, right? So it's not like it's only one right approach to it. You don't have to just start with Orimono or Wabori and that's it. I mean, even the actual people, the actual masters performing the art themselves, they actually started, many of them, I don't want to say all of them, obviously, or the majority, but a lot of them started actually with Western tattoos themselves. Many have also actually started doing Western stuff. And then they were like, oh crap, we have such a rich history. Maybe I should learn more about my own culture and focus on that.
Yes.
So don't feel constrained or restricted from getting either Japanese traditional or neo-trad or whatever you want to get, just because you already have some work or anything along those lines, right? I'll also call out that a lot of Horishi from Japan are also either starting to travel more abroad, right? And so they'll attend conferences and workshops and stuff like that. But they're also being more receptive to foreigners getting work done, right? So I know that for some people, they're constrained by, geographical constraints. They might not be able to travel, and it's perfectly fine to work with your local artists, right? And have that journey together and learning more about horimono and traditional Japanese tattooing. But it also works to, like, hey, save some money and travel or wait until they're here near you, right? A lot of people do a little bit of everything, right? So there's no one size fits all and all of this stuff. We're just excited to get work done. We're excited to have you as part of the community. So having said all that, Aaron, thank you so much for joining me. I love talking to you. You're such an interesting and knowledgeable guy and such a strong, passionate supporter. So I really do enjoy talking to you. I'm sure we're going to have you here in the future, maybe in a sort of different format, right? Maybe more conversational type of stuff, commenting on works and stuff like that. Who knows? There's more stuff to come. So,
well, I'm excited to see what the podcast branches out into. And again, thank you for having me, and thank you, more importantly, for entertaining me and all of the viewers and readers, because it's been fun to watch this blossom and grow. So I'm excited for what the future holds for Waboripedia as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aaron. If you would like to learn more about the world of traditional Japanese tattooing, follow the Waboripedia Instagram page, hit like and subscribe in the YouTube and Spotify channels, and stay tuned for the meanings and stories behind Japanese tattooing, Horishi interviews, and more.